Hi everyone, this is Josh from the Narrate team. In week 3 of Narrate's series on emotions, Help, I Feel, Adam asked the question, how do your thoughts about the future impact you emotionally? Adam cites a helpful video of a leading psychologist, Daniel Gilbert, as well as insight from Jesus in the Bible. A link to the video portion is available on narratechurch.org in the blog section, as well as Facebook.
We started this series a couple weeks ago called Help, I Feel. And there's lots of ways you could say that, which is part of the idea behind the series. You could say that with rejection. You could say that with a sense of indignation. You could say that with a sense of depression. But ultimately what we're exploring is the fact that we're profoundly feeling beings. Like we feel profoundly. And that oftentimes what happens in contexts like this is that in order to be a disciple of whatever that means, the idea is you shut off feeling and you just go purely cerebral, purely mental, purely on the brain level. And what we've been exploring, first of all, in the first week was that Jesus felt profoundly. And the more time you spend with the Gospels with this lens on, the more you see his just being confronted by the myriad emotion that you and I deal with, and yet he was God and was closer to the Father than anyone else. And so there's a sense of encouragement from that. And in the first week, what we explored was that Jesus was able to identify that he was feeling, and he even had words for it. And so the first week, really, the challenge was to begin to expand our vocabulary. We've talked about the fact that we have over 5,000 words in the English language that we can use to articulate what we're feeling. And so that was the first challenge, was that you would go and write a really good country music song full of feeling. And then in the second week, we really asked the question, like, okay, so seriously, what is the point? Is it just so that country music translates, or that you can write good poetry, or you could go to work for Hallmark? Like, what's the point of being able to articulate feeling? And what we looked at last week was we just set up a few different pillars of Legos, really, and just as this visual reminder that there's 3 things that we all experience in life. We all experience feelings, we all also have core values, and we also behave. And what we explored last week was that what you see in Jesus' example was this way of understanding what he's feeling, but because he was so articulate and aware of what he was feeling, he was able to prevent himself from sabotaging his behavior by instead living from his core values. How many of you found that to be really easy this week? How many of you just went 1 for 100? That was my goal, 1 for 100. I think I made 1 for 100. The 99 were painful. So where I want to go for the rest of this conversation, you guys, is I just want to drill down on a few specific areas. And I guess, admittedly, this is a fairly autobiographical series, and so I kind of hate that makes me look self-absorbed, but I am. But I just don't like you to know that I am. So where we're going to go over the next few is I want to actually end this series by talking about the emotion that comes with looking in the mirror, in this incredible sense that we don't measure up, mostly to ourselves, self-hatred. The week before that, I want to explore this negative emotion and what's the role of negative emotion in the human experience, and could it actually be a good thing? Like, is James crazy when he says, consider it pure joy, my friends, whenever you face trials? And okay, if we step out of that from just the intellectual standpoint, but get into it from the emotional standpoint, like what does it look like to embrace that? But this morning, what I want to talk about is emotion as it relates to the future. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, though we're working on a way that we can take live poll, and you right from your smartphone can switch over from ESPN right now to just answering a poll, and we'll have real results right there. And for those of you with a flip phone, then we'll give you Morse code or something. We'll give you a flashlight, and we'll come up with some code for that. But for how many of you, when you think about emotional intelligence and emotional pain, I wonder for how many of you where that translates very quickly is to the future. Whether it deals with some circumstance that you're worrying about, whether it deals with health or finances, or whether you find yourself in a situation where suddenly you're confronted with the fact that you too will die someday. I wonder for how many of you is there this profound frustration with the future? And that if you could begin to really because we've been talking about what grade would you give yourself? Like if you were to grade your emotional intelligence, and this week it occurred to me, that's really not a fair assessment. It's what's your GPA? Because there's several different subjects that play into your emotional intelligence, wouldn't you agree? And I wonder if you became more emotionally intelligent about your future, and the way you process and think about the future, how might that translate to your overall emotional health? See, I guess part of me, this was born out of was this realization that what gets me in trouble is when I start jumping ahead days, months, years, even decades, and that's what gets me all bent out of shape. And have you noticed that it's not just a you thing, but a human thing, that we have this profound infatuation with the future? It's not a Christian thing. It's not a Western thing, whether you want to talk about the Chinese horoscope calendar what that culture, or you want to talk about the Aztec calendar, or you want to talk about Americans and their prophetic billboards. With me? Like there's this desire we have to know the future. When I was in college, I worked in the summers for this engineering firm, and we tested. So there was the engineering portion where those guys had, they did stuff engineers do. I don't really know. They had air conditioning, and then there was the lab, and we tested dirt and concrete and asphalt, and ran proctors on dirt, and like compaction tests, and broke concrete cylinders. It was a great summer job after spending the year thinking. And the lab had guys like me who were there just for a season, but then they had these veterans. And you could imagine that these guys didn't always take kindly to 19-year-old versions of me walking in the room. And so it was the type of culture, I actually really loved the culture. It reminded me of Laurel and the culture I grew up in, because it was this very hardworking, no-nonsense kind of culture. One of the head lab guys who I really enjoyed, his name was Mike, and he was the type of guy that when you shook his hand, you had to go to the ER and get stitches in your hands because his hands were just so callous and worn, and he was just a working man because he works with concrete. If you've ever touched that for 10 seconds, you're like, dah. And I remember Mike was the type of guy that if he was, you really needed him to be on your team because life was miserable if he wasn't, and he'd walk through a wall for you if he was on your team. And one of the things I learned very quickly was Mike hated it when you tried to pressure him about the future. Like, hey, when are you going to have this result? Or what's this result going to be? Especially when guys with collars walked from the air conditioning into the lab and they started pressuring him for information about the future. And he had this statement that he would pull out in his most frustrated of times. And he would just look, and I just have so many memories of him looking at these different people, sometimes young guys, sometimes even me. And he would just have this disgusted look on his face, and he'd say, I don't know. I left my crystal ball at home. And there's this poignant, filled statement. It's one of those statements that I've tried to, like when you hear somebody say something like, oh, that was funny, and then you try to use it, and you're like, oh, I'm a jerk. That doesn't work for me at all. I don't have that temperament. So this morning what I want to jump into is this whole idea of the future. And this week looked like lots of other weeks, every other week where I teach, where I had all this material and all these resources and all these personal learnings and all these observations and all these questions and all these different people that I was plagiarizing. And I was spent the whole week kind of bringing it together and weaving it together and allowing science to act as commentary to the text and all those kinds of things. And then on Friday at 11 a.m., I'm pulling an audible. Because what I realized was that what I was trying to do was summarize one particular guy's stuff that I found to be incredibly helpful. His name is Dan Gilbert. He's a psychologist at Harvard. He's written a book called Stumbling on Happiness. He's published numerous articles in journals and medical journals. He's a researcher on this issue of the future. And the most helpful thing I found, because I've actually spent a lot of time learning his stuff. I've read his book. I've read some of his medical journals, at least the portions that I understood, I can say that I read. But the most helpful resource he put out there was actually a TED Talk called The Surprising Science of Happiness. And what I realized on Friday was, okay, I think Narrate trusts me enough to know that I wasn't just sipping on pina coladas and watching the movies in my office all week. I don't even know what a pina colada is. I don't know why I choose that. What is that? It sounds like coconut and pineapple. It just sounds nasty. Anyway, so what I want to do here this morning, you guys, is rather than me kind of wrap it all into one, here's what hit me Friday, and I think it was Josh that I said it to. I think I can do a C- job of trying to summarize his stuff and bringing Jesus into it. But I think if the win is here's helpful information, the most honest thing we can do is go, you guys, you got to see this video. So what I'm going to do is we're going to watch this TED Talk. It's about 20 minutes long, and then I want to jump up here and open up the text and spend just a few moments. I think you'll see how it quickly comes back to Jesus. Let me just warn you, this isn't a church service. Well, this is, ironically. What you're about to watch isn't. Some of the ideas you may or may not agree with, some of the things he talks about. I think he even cusses twice, so you can cover your ears for that. But I just want you to take this in as you think about this question, what does it look like to be emotionally intelligent about the future? I think Dan's stuff might blow your mind. So I invite you to turn your attention to the screen.
When you have 21 minutes to speak, 2 million years seems like a really long time. But evolutionarily, 2 million years is nothing. And yet in 2 million years, the human brain has nearly tripled in mass, going from the 1.25 pound brain of our ancestor here, habilis, to the almost 3-pound meatloaf that everybody here has between their ears. What is it about a big brain that nature was so eager for everyone else to have one? Well, it turns out when brains triple in size, they don't just get 3 times bigger, they gain new structures. And one of the main reasons that our brain got so big is because it got a new part called the frontal lobe, and particularly a part called the prefrontal cortex. Now, what does a prefrontal cortex do for you that should justify the entire architectural overhaul of the human skull in the blink of evolutionary time? Well, turns out the prefrontal cortex does lots of things, but one of the most important things it does is it is an experience simulator. You know, pilots practice in flight simulators so that they don't make real mistakes in planes. Human beings have this marvelous adaptation that they can actually have experiences in their heads before they try them out in real life. This is a trick that none of our ancestors could do, that no other animal can do quite like we can. It's a marvelous adaptation. It's up there with opposable thumbs and standing upright in language as one of the things that got our species out of the trees and into the shopping mall. Now, all of you have done this. I mean, you know, Ben & Jerry's doesn't have liver and onion ice cream, and it's not because they whipped some up, tried it, and went yuck. It's because without leaving your armchair, you can simulate that flavor and say yuck before you make it. Let's see how your experience simulators are working. Let's just run a quick diagnostic before I proceed with the rest of the talk. Here's 2 different futures that I invite you to contemplate, and you can try to simulate them and tell me which one you think you might prefer. One of them is winning the lottery. This is about $314 million. And the other is becoming paraplegic. So just give it a moment of thought. You probably don't feel like you need a moment of thought. And interestingly, there are data on these 2 groups of people, data on how happy they are. And this is exactly what you expected, isn't it? But these aren't the data. I made these up. These are the data. You failed the pop quiz and you're hardly 5 minutes into the lecture. Because the fact is that a year after losing the use of their legs and a year after winning the lotto, lottery winners and paraplegics are equally happy with their lives. Now, don't feel too bad about failing the first pop quiz because everybody fails all of the pop quizzes all of the time. The research that my laboratory has been doing, that economists and psychologists around the country have been doing, have revealed something really quite startling to us. Something we call the impact bias, which is the tendency for the simulator to work badly. For the simulator to make you believe that different outcomes are more different than in fact they really are. From field studies to laboratory studies, we see that winning or losing an election, gaining or losing a romantic partner, getting or not getting a promotion, passing or not passing a college test, on and on, have far less impact, less intensity, and much less duration than people expect them to have. In fact, a recent study, this almost floors me, a recent study showing how major life traumas affect people suggests that if it happened over 3 months ago, with only a few exceptions, it has no impact whatsoever on your happiness. Why? Because happiness can be synthesized. Sir Thomas Browne wrote in 1642, "I am the happiest man alive. I have that in me that can convert poverty to riches, adversity to prosperity. I am more invulnerable than Achilles, fortune, hath not one place to hit me. What kind of remarkable machinery does this guy have in his head? Well, it turns out it's precisely the same remarkable machinery that all of us have. Human beings have something that we might think of as a psychological immune system, a system of cognitive processes, largely non-conscious cognitive processes, that help them change their views of the world so that they can feel better about the worlds in which they find themselves. Like Sir Thomas, you have this machine. Unlike Sir Thomas, you seem not to know it. We synthesize happiness, but we think happiness is a thing to be found. Now, you don't need me to give you too many examples of people synthesizing happiness, I suspect, though I'm going to show you some experimental evidence. You don't have to look very far for evidence. As a challenge to myself, since I say this once in a while in lectures, I took a copy of the New York Times and tried to find some instances of people synthesizing happiness. And here are 3 guys synthesizing happiness. I'm so much better off physically, financially, emotionally, and almost every other way, mentally, almost every other way. I don't have 1 minute's regret. It was a glorious experience. I believe it turned out for the best. Who are these characters who are so damn happy? Well, the first one is Jim Wright. Some of you are old enough to remember. He was the chairman of the House of Representatives. And he resigned in disgrace when this young Republican named Newt Gingrich found out about a shady book deal he had done. He lost everything. Most powerful Democrat in the country, lost everything. He lost his money, he lost his power. What does he have to say all these years later about it? I am so much better off, physically, financially, mentally, and in almost every other way. What other way would there be to be better off? Vegetably, minerally, animally? He's pretty much covered in there. Maurice Bickham is somebody you've never heard of. Maurice Bickham uttered these words. Upon being released, he was 78 years old. He'd spent 37 years in Louisiana State Penitentiary for a crime he didn't commit. He was ultimately exonerated at the age of 78 through DNA evidence. And what did he have to say about his experience? I don't have 1 minute's regret. It was a glorious experience. Glorious! This guy is not saying, well, yeah, there's some nice guys. They had a gym. It's glorious, a word we usually reserve for something like a religious experience. Harrius Langerman uttered these words, and he's somebody you might have known but didn't, because in 1949 he read a little article in the paper about a hamburger stand owned by these 2 brothers named McDonald's, and he thought, that's a really neat idea. So he went to find them. They said, we'd give you a franchise on this for $3,000. Harry went back to New York, asked his brother, who was an investment banker, to loan him the $3,000, and his brother's immortal words were, you idiot, nobody eats hamburgers. He wouldn't lend him the money, and of course, 6 months later, Ray Kroc had exactly the same idea. It turns out people do eat hamburgers, and Ray Kroc, for a while, became the richest man in America. Oh, and then finally, the best of all possible worlds. Some of you recognize this young photo of Pete Best, who was the original drummer for the Beatles, until they, kind of like sent him out on an errand and snuck away and picked up Ringo on a tour. Well, in 1994, when Pete Best was interviewed, yes, he's still a drummer. Yes, he's a studio musician. He had this to say, I'm happier than I would have been with the Beatles. Okay, there's something important to be learned from these people, and it is the secret of happiness. Here it is, finally, to be revealed. First, accrue wealth, power, and prestige, then lose it. Second, spend as much of your life in prison as you possibly can. Third, make somebody else really, really rich. And finally, never, ever join the Beatles. Okay, now, I, like Z. Frank, can predict your next thought, which is, yeah, right. Because when people synthesize happiness, as these gentlemen seem to have done, we all smile at them, but we kind of roll our eyes and say, yeah, right, you never really wanted the job. Oh, yeah, right. You really didn't have that much in common with her, and you figured that out just about the time she threw the engagement ring in your face. We smirk because we believe that synthetic happiness is not of the same quality as what we might call natural happiness. What are these terms? Natural happiness is what we get when we get what we wanted, and synthetic happiness is what we make when we don't get what we wanted. And in our society, we have a strong belief that synthetic happiness is of an inferior kind. Why do we have that belief? Well, it's very simple. What kind of economic engine would keep churning if we believed that not getting what we want could make us just as happy as getting it? With all apologies to my friend Mathieu Ricard, a shopping mall full of Zen monks is not going to be particularly profitable because they don't want stuff enough. I want to suggest to you that synthetic happiness is every bit as real and enduring as the kind of happiness you stumble upon when you get exactly what you were aiming for. Now, I'm a scientist, so I'm going to do this not with rhetoric, but by marinating you in a little bit of data. Let me first show you an experimental paradigm that is used to demonstrate the synthesis of happiness among regular old folks. And this isn't mine. There's a 50-year-old paradigm called the free choice paradigm. It's very simple. You bring in, say, 6 objects, and you ask a subject to rank them from the most to the least liked. In this case, because the experiment I'm going to tell you about uses them, these are Monet prints. So everybody can rank these Monet prints from the one they like the most to the one they like the least. Now we give you a choice. We happen to have some extra prints in the closet, and we're going to give you one as your prize to take home. We happen to have number 3 and number 4, we tell the subject. There's a bit of a difficult choice, because neither one is preferred strongly to the other, but naturally, people tend to pick number 3 because they liked it a little better than number 4. Sometime later, it could be 15 minutes, it could be 15 days, the same stimuli are put before the subject, and the subject is asked to re-rank the stimuli. Tell us how much you like them now. What happens? Watch as happiness is synthesized. This is the result that has been replicated over and over again. You're watching happiness be synthesized. Would you like to see it again? Happiness. The one I got is really better than I thought. That other one I didn't get sucks. That's the synthesis of happiness. Now, what's the right response to that? Yeah, right. Now, here's the experiment we did, and I hope this is going to convince you that yeah, right was not the right response. We did this experiment with a group of patients who had anterograde amnesia. These are hospitalized patients. Most of them have Korsakoff syndrome, polyneurotic psychosis, that they drank way too much and they can't make new memories. Okay, they remember their childhood, but if you walk in and introduce yourself and then leave the room, when you come back, they don't know who you are. We took our Monet prints to the hospital, and we asked these patients to rank them from the one they liked the most to the one they liked the least. We then gave them the choice between number 3 and number 4. Like everybody else, they said, gee, thanks, doc, that's great. I could use a new print. I'll take number 3. We explained we would have number 3 mailed to them. We gathered up our materials, and we went out of the room and counted to a half hour. Back into the room, we say, hi, we're back. The patients, bless them, say, oh, doc, I'm sorry, I got a memory problem, that's why I'm here. If I've met you before, I don't remember. Really, Jim, you don't remember? I was just here with the Monet prints. Sorry, doc, I just don't have a clue. No problem, Jim. All I want you to do is rank these for me from the one you like the most to the one you like the least. What do? Well, let's first check and make sure they're really amnesic. We asked these amnesic patients to tell us which one they own, which one they chose last time, which one is theirs. And what we find is amnesic patients just guess. These are normal controls. If I did this with you, all of you would know which print you chose. But if I do this with amnesic patients, they don't have a clue. They can't pick their print out of a lineup. Here's what normal controls do. They synthesize happiness, right? This is the change in liking score, the change from the first time they ranked to the second time they ranked. Normal controls show, that was the magic I showed you. Now I'm showing it to you in graphical form. The one I own is better than I thought. The one I didn't own, the one I left behind, is not as good as I thought. Amnesics do exactly the same thing. Think about this result. These people like better the one they own, but they don't know they own it. Yeah, right is not the right response. What these people did when they synthesized happiness is they really, truly changed their affective, hedonic, aesthetic reactions to that poster. They're not just saying it because they own it, because they don't know they own it. Now, when psychologists show you bars, you know that they are showing you averages of lots of people. And yet, all of us have this psychological immune system, this capacity to synthesize happiness, but some of us do this trick better than others. And some situations allow anybody to do it more effectively than other situations do. It turns out that freedom, the ability to make up your mind and change your mind, is the friend of natural happiness, because it allows you to choose among all those delicious futures that and find the one that you would most enjoy. But freedom to choose, to change and make up your mind, is the enemy of synthetic happiness. And I'm going to show you why. Dilbert already knows, of course. You're reading the cartoon as I'm talking. Dogbert's tech support, how may I abuse you? My printer prints a blank page after every document. Why would you complain about getting free paper? Free? Aren't you just giving my own paper? Egad, man, look at the quality of the free paper compared to your lousy regular paper. Only a fool or a liar would say that they look the same. Now that you mention it, it does seem a little silkier. What are you doing? I'm helping people accept the things they cannot change. Indeed. The psychological immune system works best when we are totally stuck, when we are trapped. This is the difference between dating and marriage, right? I mean, you go out on a date with a guy and he picks his nose. You don't go out on another date. You're married to a guy and he picks his nose. Yeah, he has a heart of gold. Don't touch the fruitcake, right? You find a way to be happy with what's happened. Now, what I want to show you is that people don't know this about themselves, and not knowing this can work to our supreme disadvantage. Here's an experiment we did at Harvard. We created a photography course, a black and white photography course, and we allowed students to come in and learn how to use a darkroom. So we gave them cameras. They went around campus. They took 12 pictures of their favorite professors in their dorm room and their dog and all the other things they wanted to have Harvard memories of. They bring us the camera. We make up a contact sheet. They figure out which are the two best pictures, and we now spend 6 hours teaching them about darkrooms, and they blow 2 of them up, and they have 2 gorgeous 8x10 glossies of meaningful things to them, and we say, which one would you like to give up? They say, I have to give one up? Oh, yes, we need one as evidence of the class project. So you have to give me one. You have to make a choice. You get to keep one, and I get to keep one. Now, there are 2 conditions in this experiment. In one case, the students are told, but if you want to change your mind, I'll always have the other one here. And in the next 4 days before I actually mail it to headquarters, I'll be glad to, headquarters. I'll be glad to swap it out with you. In fact, I'll come to your dorm room and just give me an email. Better yet, I'll check with you. You ever want to change your mind? It's totally returnable. The other half of the students are told exactly the opposite. Make your choice, and by the way, the mail is going out, in 2 minutes to England. Your picture will be winging its way over the Atlantic. You will never see it again. Now, half of the students in each of these conditions are asked to make predictions about how much they're going to come to like the picture that they keep and the picture they leave behind. Other students are just sent back to their little dorm rooms, and they are measured over the next 3 to 6 days on their liking and satisfaction with the pictures. Look at what we find. First of all, here's what students think is going to happen. They think they're going to maybe come to like the picture they chose a little more than the one they left behind, but these are not statistically significant differences. It's a very small increase, and it doesn't much matter whether they were in the reversible or irreversible condition. Wrong-o. Bad simulators. Because here's what's really happening, both right before the swap and 5 days later. People who are stuck with that picture, who have no choice, who can never change their mind, like it a lot. And people who are deliberating, should I return it? Have I gotten the right one? Maybe this isn't the good one. Maybe I left the good one, have killed themselves. They don't like their picture. And in fact, even after the opportunity to swap has expired, they still don't like their picture. Why? Because the irreversible condition is not conducive to the synthesis of happiness. So here's the final piece of this experiment. We bring in a whole new group of naive Harvard students, and we say, we're doing a photography course, and we can do it one of 2 ways. We could do it so that when you take the 2 pictures, you'd have 4 days to change your mind, or we're doing another course where you take the 2 pictures and you make up your mind right away and you can never change it. Which course would you like to be in? Duh! 66% of the students, 2/3, prefer to be in the course where they have the opportunity to change their mind. Hello? 66% of the students choose to be in the course in which they will ultimately be deeply dissatisfied with the picture. Because they do not know the conditions under which synthetic happiness grows. The bard said everything best, of course, and he's making my point here, but he's making it hyperbolically. 'Tis nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's nice poetry, but that can't exactly be right. Is there really nothing good or bad? Is it really the case that gallbladder surgery and a trip to Paris are just the same thing? Nah, that seems like a one-question IQ test. They can't be exactly the same. In more turgid prose, but closer to the truth, was the father of modern capitalism, Adam Smith, and he said this. This is worth contemplating. The great source of both the misery and disorders of human life seems to arise from overrating the difference between one permanent situation and another. Some of these situations may no doubt deserve to be preferred to others, but none of them can deserve to be pursued with that passionate ardor which drives us to violate the rules either of prudence or of justice, or to corrupt the future tranquility of our minds either by shame from the remembrance of our own folly or by remorse for the horror of our own injustice. In other words, yes, some things are better than others. We should have preferences that lead us into one future over another. But when those preferences drive us too hard and too fast because we have overrated the difference between these futures, we are at risk. When our ambition is bounded, it leads us to work joyfully. When our ambition is unbounded, it leads us to lie, to cheat, to steal, to hurt others, to sacrifice things of real value. When our fears are bounded, we're prudent, we're cautious, we're thoughtful. When our fears are unbounded and overblown, we're reckless and we're cowardly. The lesson I want to leave you with from these data is that our longings and our worries are both to some degree overblown because we have within us the capacity to manufacture the very commodity we are constantly chasing when we choose experience. Thank you.
It strikes me that, and here's what I spent the week synthesizing myself, and now I'm just giving it to you in bifurcated chunks. Doesn't it stand out to you that like Jesus warned us that 2,000 years ago, this man who many of us believe was Savior and Lord, he seemed to warn or tell or remind, listen, there's this capacity that makes you uniquely human. And like so many other privileges, like so many other opportunities, like so many other gifts, you can use it for ill, or you can use it for good. I just, call me simplistic, but I just found myself over and over the last few months as I've been trying to reconcile what he was saying with my own desires and the realization that it's these, like, oftentimes inaccurate projections of the future that get me in trouble. I just found myself back in one of the more profound places in literature, period, I think. Jesus says in Matthew 6, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. What at its core, not its religious core, what at its core, what is worry? It's a simulation of the future that preys upon our own suspicions and low views of life. Jesus continues, look at the birds of the air. They did not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? There's this tendency, he seems to be saying, this tendency to project yourself out into the future. Be careful, because it'll wreck your life, because it's often inaccurate. And maybe you're not as dependent upon those futures as you might think. And why do you worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon of all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. And here I think is where Jesus gives us an alternative, a different option. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field. See, now he enters God into the conversation. If that is how he clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So why do you project negative? Why do you simulate worst case? Why do you say, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans, these people who don't even believe God is good, who think that they're just toys that he's playing with, they believe that. They run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows what you need. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for each day has enough to worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. This takes me back to the most simple place, and it's this place where Jesus taught his followers how to pray. Let me just remind you of this, and then we're going to pray. He says, when you pray, just kind of organize your thoughts around this. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. God, God, it's about you. And I start with you. And when you can transition from God first, he says, then just pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. To me, it just blows my mind to see how a modern Harvard scientist is telling us what Jesus says here. What is Jesus saying? Just remind yourself that getting your way is a terrible strategy for happiness. Just remind yourself that what you signed up for was you wanted God's will, not your own. And then he says these 6 simple but incredibly arduous words. Give us today our daily bread. What is that? It's as much a reminder as it is a prayer, isn't it? It's a reference to the daily bread is a reference to, oh yeah, God, whatever situation you've put me in, you've been faithful. And that doesn't mean that the diagnosis has always been positive. It doesn't mean that nobody I love has died, but you've always been faithful. The Apostle Paul was onto this, wasn't he? When he said things like, man, there was all this stuff that I thought I had to have, and now I say it's rubbish compared to Christ. He was onto this, wasn't he, when he says that the peace of Christ transcends all understanding. There's this question. What does it look like to be emotionally intelligent as it relates to the future? And you'll have your own wrestling and thinking to do, and you can re-listen to this TED podcast all you like. For me, and I guess I'm going to suggest for you what it may look like, is first and foremost catching yourself feeling things about the future. And then having the presence of mind to go, wait a minute, this is the way I'm wired. This is what God has given my brain the ability to do, but it's generally wrong. It often doesn't get it right anyway. And what I think I have to have, I don't. God is there. He goes before me. He's always been faithful. And I want his will, not my own. What does it mean to be emotionally intelligent about the future? I think, and this is where I love doing life with you guys, I think it means first and foremost we have the opportunity to understand through science the way our brains are made, to get deeper into what it means to be made in the image of God, to understand that we have the ability to simulate the future, but to not trust those simulations, but instead to go, no. There's my Heavenly Father. I don't always know what's next, but I know he's there. And I'm trusting that simulation of the future. And I'm using the cross and the reminder of how much he loves me in the cross to know that even in my darkest pain, he's there. And he's good. I'd like to pray, and we're going to give you a chance to sing a song that I think captures this. God, Lord God, we just come before you, and I don't have a good read this morning, Lord, on where we're at individually. But God, it strikes me that it's not just me who can get myself in all kinds of trouble about living days and weeks and months and years ahead, of developing these white-knuckle ideals about what we have to have. And in the most simplistic and yet, I think, spiritually honest way possible, God, to just confess that ultimately all those things it's an invitation to step away from instead trusting in you more than ourselves. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.